The laughter hit first, sharp, loud, the kind that isn't meant to include you. Staff Sergeant Raymond Ray Delacroix stood near the refreshment table at Fort Hood's Veterans Appreciation Barbecue, paper plate in one hand, and his left forearm exposed where he'd rolled his sleeve against the Texas heat. The tattoo was barely there anymore. A ghost of dark ink faded to a bluish-grey blur on sun-spotted skin, the lines soft and broken like a road map left in the rain. 3 young soldiers at the next table weren't even trying to be quiet. "Yo, check out Grandpa's tat," one of them said, loud enough for half the pavilion to hear. "What is that, a stick figure?" His buddy leaned in, squinting. "Nah, bro, I think it's a fish. Or maybe an anchor. Hard to tell when it looks like someone drew it with a crayon in 1965. They laughed again. What those soldiers didn't know about that tattoo would silence every one of them before the afternoon was over. Some ink tells a story. And some ink is the story. Remember that. Fort Hood's annual Veterans Appreciation Day was one of those events the base put on every spring. Half goodwill gesture, half public relations photo op. Folding tables lined up under white canopy tents, burgers and hot dogs on steel trays, a country band tuning up near the parking lot. Active duty mingled with retired servicemen and local families. Most of the older veterans wore ball caps with their ship names or unit patches stitched across the front. Some wore medals pinned to vests. Others, like Ray Delacroix, wore nothing that announced what they'd done or where they'd been. He was 71 years old. Lean frame, weathered hands, deep lines around his eyes that came from decades of squinting into sun and sea spray. He wore a plain khaki button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows, faded jeans, and boots that had seen better decades. He'd driven 40 minutes from his place outside Killeen to attend because his neighbour's grandson was getting a commendation, and the boy's grandmother had asked Ray to come. That was reason enough. He wasn't there for attention. He never was. The 3 soldiers at the next table were specialists. Young, fit, loud in the way that men are loud when they think rank and youth make them the centre of every room. The one doing most of the talking was named Colton Briggs. 23 years old, 2 years into his first enlistment, 0 deployments, and a mouth that moved faster than his brain. He had a fresh sleeve tattoo on his right arm, bold black tribal lines, a screaming eagle, the words "Warrior Born in Gothic Script." It had cost him $1,400 at a parlour in Killeen. He was proud of it. He made sure people saw it. When he spotted Ray's forearm, the contrast was too much to resist. "Hey, old-timer," Colton called across the gap between tables. Ray looked up. His eyes were calm, steady, the kind of calm that either comes from having nothing to prove or from having proved everything a long time ago. "Sir?" Ray's voice was quiet, even. "That tattoo? What's it supposed to be?" Colton grinned at his buddies. "I mean, no offence, but it looks like it's melting off your arm." The 2 soldiers with him, Kendrick and Vasquez, tried not to laugh and failed. A couple of nearby families glanced over uncomfortably. Ray looked down at his forearm, at the faded ink. His thumb brushed across it, slow and deliberate, the way a man touches something sacred. "It's old," he said simply. "Yeah, I can see that," Colton said. "What was it? A barbed wire? A girlfriend's name?" More laughter. "You should get it covered up, man. My guy in Killeen could fix that right up. Turn it into something that actually looks like something." Ray's jaw tightened. Just slightly. If you weren't watching, you'd have missed it. But one person nearby didn't miss it. An older woman sitting 2 tables over. She'd been watching since the laughter started. Her husband had served in Korea. She knew what restraint looked like. She knew what was under it. "I appreciate the offer," Ray said. His voice didn't change, didn't rise, didn't crack. "But I'll keep it the way it is," Colton shrugged, turning back to his friends. "Suit yourself, Grandpa. Just saying, nobody can even tell what that is anymore." He flexed his own arm, tracing the lines of his fresh ink. "This is how you do a military tattoo." Kendrick nodded. "Facts." Ray said nothing. He picked up his plate and moved to the end of the table, closer to the shade. He sat down slowly, the way a man sits when his knees carry 71 years, and a few things the VA doesn't have a code for. He ate quietly, alone, and if anyone had been close enough to see his eyes, they would have noticed he wasn't looking at the food. He was looking at his forearm, at the tattoo, and somewhere behind those eyes, he was somewhere else entirely. The tattoo was small, maybe 3 inches long, 2 inches wide. It sat on the inside of his left forearm, just below the crease of his elbow. Time and sun and age had blurred it into something nearly unrecognizable. Soft edges, faded pigment, lines that had once been sharp now bleeding into skin that had thinned with the years. But if you knew what you were looking at, if you'd ever seen one before, you'd recognize it. A trident, not just any trident, the special warfare insignia, the mark of a Navy SEAL. And beneath it, barely visible now, 3 small letters and 2 numbers that would mean nothing to a civilian, but everything to the men who'd earned the right to wear them. Ray hadn't talked about his service in decades. His neighbours knew he was a veteran. His neighbour's grandson knew Ray had been in the Navy. That was it. That was all Ray offered, and nobody pressed further because Ray had the kind of quiet that told you pressing wasn't welcome. He'd done 26 years. He'd been places that still didn't have names on any official document. He'd done things that lived only in classified briefings and in the memories of the men who survived because of him. But that was another life. Another man, almost. And today he was just Ray, eating a burger at a barbecue, getting laughed at by kids who didn't know the difference between ink and insignia. Colton wasn't done. That was the thing about men like Colton. They found a joke and rode it until the wheels fell off. 20 minutes later, Ray was standing near the memorial wall, reading the names of soldiers from Fort Hood who'd been killed in action. He stood straight, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back. Military bearing so ingrained it was involuntary, like breathing. Colton walked past with Kendrick, spotted Ray and nudged his buddy. There he is, crayon tattoo. Bet he got that thing at a county fair. He said it just loud enough. Ray heard it. The older woman 2 tables over heard it too. She shook her head slowly, lips pressed thin, the way people look when they're watching something wrong happen and can't stop it. You know, Ray said, not turning around, the names on that wall earned their rest. Might want to lower your voice near them. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a rebuke. It was the kind of statement that a man makes when he's walked among the dead and knows what silence is owed to them. Colton blinked. For half a second, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe. The faintest recognition that he'd bumped against something harder than he expected. But he was 23, and pride heals fast at 23. All right, old man. Didn't mean any disrespect to the wall, just to your tattoo, he laughed. Kendrick laughed. They walked away. Ray stayed. He read every name. Every single one. The barbecue was scheduled to run until 4 o'clock, and the main event was a brief address by a visiting flag officer at 2:30. The base commander had been promoting it for weeks. A 2-star admiral from Naval Special Warfare Command was visiting Fort Hood as part of a cross-branch liaison tour. It was unusual for a Navy admiral to appear at an Army post's veteran event, but the current climate of joint operations had made these appearances more common. Most of the young soldiers didn't care much. An admiral was Navy. They were Army. Different world. But when the convoy of black SUVs rolled through the main gate at 2:15, even Colton stopped talking long enough to watch. Rear Admiral James Arthur Caldwell stepped out of the second vehicle. He was 64 years old, tall, silver-haired, with a jaw that looked like it had been shaped from the same granite they use for war memorials. He wore service dress whites, the kind of uniform that makes even civilians stand straighter. His chest carried enough ribbons to wallpaper a small room. 2 stars gleamed on his shoulder boards. He walked with the controlled precision of a man who had commanded at every level from platoon to fleet. His aide, a young lieutenant commander, walked half a step behind, carrying a leather portfolio. The base commander greeted the admiral with a handshake and a smile. Cameras clicked, families pointed, soldiers straightened up. The whole energy of the event shifted the way it always does when real authority enters a space. The admiral made his way through the crowd, shaking hands with veterans, thanking families, crouching down to talk to a kid in a wheelchair whose father had been killed in Afghanistan. He was good at this, genuine, not performative. You could tell by the way he listened, actually listened, when a Vietnam vet with a trembling hand told him about Khe Sanh. He didn't rush. He didn't check his watch. He held the man's hand and nodded and said, "Thank you for holding the line, sir. We're all still standing because of men like you." And he meant it. It was during this walk through the crowd that Admiral Caldwell passed the refreshment area. Ray was sitting alone again, finishing a cup of coffee. He wasn't watching the Admiral's approach. He was watching a pair of sparrows fighting over a piece of hamburger bun on the ground. Small things. Ray had learned to notice small things a long time ago, in places where noticing the small things kept you alive. The Admiral was 3 tables away when he stopped. His aide nearly walked into him. Caldwell's eyes had locked onto something. His body went still the way only a military man's body goes still, complete, sudden, total. Like a switch had been flipped. He was staring at Ray's forearm, at the faded tattoo. The Admiral said nothing for a long moment. Then he took a breath. A slow one. The kind of breath a man takes when the past reaches up and grabs him by the throat. He changed direction, walked straight toward Ray. His aide followed, confused. The base commander followed the aide, more confused. Colton and his buddies were standing 15 feet away, plates in hand, watching the Admiral approach the old man they'd been mocking all afternoon. Ray looked up when the shadow fell across his table. He saw the whites first, then the stars, then the face. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, but the slow kind, the kind that has to travel through decades to arrive. "That ink," Admiral Caldwell said. His voice was quiet, not soft, quiet the way a rifle is quiet before the shot. He pointed at Ray's forearm. "May I?" Ray held out his arm. The Admiral leaned in, studied the faded lines, the trident, the letters, the numbers. When he straightened up, his eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet. The way steel gets before it rusts. 1971, the Admiral said. It wasn't a question. Ray nodded. "Coronado, Class 52. The Admiral's hand went to his own left sleeve. Service dress whites buttoned at the cuff. He undid the button, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the vicinity was on him now. Colton's plate tilted in his hand, a hot dog sliding toward the edge, unnoticed. The Admiral rolled his sleeve up his forearm, and there it was. The same tattoo, same position, same forearm, same trident, same letters, same numbers beneath. The ink was clearer on the Admiral's arm. He was 7 years younger, his skin a shade less weathered, but it was unmistakably the same design, the same artist, the same mark. The mark that a small group of men received after completing the most punishing military selection process in the world. The mark that said you had earned the right to call yourself a SEAL. The mark that bound you to every man who carried it, living or dead, across every generation, every conflict, every dark night in every hostile corner of the world. "Class 67, the Admiral said, rolling his sleeve back down. "You were already a legend by the time I got through BUD/S. He extended his hand. "Senior Chief Delacroix, it is an honour, sir." The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your chest. Colton's hot dog hit the ground. He didn't pick it up. The base commander stepped forward, eyes wide. The aide was already flipping through the portfolio, searching for something. Ray took the Admiral's hand. His grip was still strong. "You don't need to call me that, Admiral. I've been Ray for a long time now." "With all due respect," Caldwell said. And his voice carried now, carried across the tables and the tents and the families and the young soldiers who had stopped breathing. "You will always be senior chief to men like me." He turned to face the crowd. His posture shifted. No longer the genial visiting officer, now the flag commander who had ordered ships into combat and sent men into the dark. "I need everyone's attention." It wasn't a request. "The man standing beside me is Senior Chief Petty Officer Raymond Delacroix, United States Navy, retired. He served 26 years in naval special warfare. He completed 6 combat deployments, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, and operations I am not authorized to name in a public setting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In 1972, Senior Chief Delacroix led a 6-man team behind enemy lines in the Mekong Delta to extract a downed pilot and 3 wounded Marines. They were outnumbered 8-1. They held their position for 11 hours with no air support and no resupply. Every member of that team was wounded. Every member of that extraction survived. The Admiral paused, let the number sit. 11 hours. Senior Chief Delacroix received the Navy Cross for that action. He also holds 2 silver stars, 3 bronze stars with valor, and 2 Purple Hearts. He was personally recommended for the Medal of Honor by his commanding officer, though the classification level of the operation at the time prevented the full submission. Another pause, longer this time. That tattoo on his arm, the one that apparently drew some commentary today. His eyes moved, found Colton, locked on. Colton's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. "That tattoo is the mark of a Navy SEAL. The same mark I carry. The same mark carried by every man who has survived the hardest military training on Earth and gone on to serve in the most demanding combat conditions known to any branch of any military in the world. It is not a decoration. It is not a fashion statement. It is a covenant. And it fades because the men who carry it spent their lives in sun and salt and sand and blood, doing things that most people will never know about and could never endure. The crowd was silent. Absolutely silent. Even the country band had stopped tuning. Admiral Caldwell turned back to Ray. "Senior Chief, I apologize on behalf of everyone here who failed to recognize what you carry. Not on your arm, in your bones." Ray looked at the Admiral for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. Small, barely there. The kind of smile that men share when words aren't enough and silence says more. "Admiral," Ray said quietly, "I didn't come here for recognition. I came because a neighbour's grandson is getting a commendation, and his grandmother asked me to be here. That's enough." "It's not enough," Caldwell said. "Not today." He turned to the base commander. "Colonel, I'd like Senior Chief Delacroix to stand beside me during the address, if that's agreeable to you, sir." The colonel nodded immediately. "It would be our honour, Admiral." As they began walking toward the podium, the Admiral passed within 5 feet of Colton Briggs. He stopped, looked at the young man's elaborate sleeve tattoo, the screaming eagle, the Gothic lettering, Warrior Born. The Admiral said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, quietly, so only Colton and his friends could hear, "Son, the ink on your arm says warrior. The ink on his arm proves it. Do you understand the difference?" Colton couldn't speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Kendrick and Vasquez were staring at their boots. When Senior Chief Delacroix earned that tattoo, he'd already survived Hell Week, 6 months of advanced training and a combat deployment. He was 22 years old, younger than you, and he never once in 50 years felt the need to show it off or explain what it meant. That's what service looks like, Specialist. Quiet, enduring, without applause. He let the silence work. Then, "I expect you to personally find the Senior Chief after today's ceremony and offer your hand and your respect. That's not an order. It's an opportunity. Don't waste it." Ray stood beside Admiral Caldwell during the address. The young soldier, the neighbour's grandson, received his commendation. Ray clapped for him, quiet pride on his face. When the ceremony ended, the Admiral shook Ray's hand one more time. "You know," Caldwell said, "I looked for you, after I took command, wanted to bring you in for the Hall of Heroes induction at Coronado." Ray shook his head. "I'm not a museum piece, Admiral. I'm just an old frogman who got lucky more times than he deserved." "Luck," Caldwell almost laughed. 11 hours in the Mekong with 6 men against 48. That's not luck, Senior Chief. That's something else entirely." Ray looked out across the crowd. Families, soldiers, veterans, kids running between tables. "It's Tuesday," he said, "and there's still good people in the world. That's enough for me." 20 minutes later, Colton Briggs walked up to Ray's table. He stood at a distance first, uncertain, his confidence from earlier stripped down to something raw and honest. Ray saw him coming, said nothing, waited. "Senior Chief Delacroix." Colton's voice was different now, thinner, real. "I owe you an apology, sir. What I said earlier about your tattoo, I didn't know. I had no idea." Ray studied the young man, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something closer to understanding. He'd been 23 once. He'd been loud once, before the jungle and the water and the years had taught him what quiet was worth. "You didn't know," Ray repeated. "That's right, you didn't. And that's the point, son. You never know what someone's carrying. The man beside you at the grocery store, the woman at the bus stop, the old guy at a barbecue with a tattoo you can't read anymore." He paused, looked at Colton's sleeve tattoo. "That's good ink, by the way. Sharp lines. Good artist." Colton blinked. "Thank you, sir. Just make sure the arm it's on does something worthy of it. That's all any ink asks." Colton extended his hand. Ray took it. Firm, steady. A handshake that passed something between them. Not forgiveness exactly, because Ray had never been angry. Something more like a lesson, absorbed through the palm. The next Veterans Day, Colton Briggs volunteered to organise the event. He personally drove to Ray Delacroix's house, picked him up, and escorted him to the front row. He introduced Ray to every soldier who would listen. Not with fanfare, not with spectacle. Quietly. The way Ray would have wanted it. And when someone new asked about the faded tattoo on the old man's forearm, Colton didn't laugh. He stood a little straighter and said, "That's the most important ink you'll ever see, and if you're smart, you'll ask him about it. Respectfully." Some tattoos are decorations, some are declarations, and some are covenants written in ink and sealed in blood, carried by men who never ask you to read them. The quietest arms often carry the loudest stories. Judge carefully. If this story moved you, wait until you hear what happened when a retired Green Beret was stopped at a courthouse security checkpoint and told his old military ID meant nothing. The judge, who happened to be walking past, he'd served under that same beret in Mogadishu. What happened next shut the entire building down. Subscribe for more stories of hidden heroes who deserve to be remembered. Comment honor if you believe respect should be given before it's demanded, and hit that like button if you think the men and women who served should never have to prove their worth twice.